Hello, Science Marchers. I'm Lucky Tran, the Managing Director. Thanks for joining us today. And Happy New Year to you all. I'd like to begin by thanking everyone in our community for all the incredible work you did in 2020. You served on the front lines of the pandemic to save lives, you marched and organized for racial justice, and you made science one of the top issues at the last election. Thank you. But of course, our work doesn't stop there. We have so much to do to fight for in 2021 for science and justice. And right away, we have another important election, 2 runoffs in Georgia tomorrow that will decide the fate and the balance of power in the Senate. And to discuss the election, we are so excited to have our friends, the team at Science for Georgia, a nonprofit that works to improve communication among scientists and the public, increase public engagement with science, and advocate for the responsible use of science in public policy. We have with us Lewis Kiffin, Brandy Wade, Amy Sharma, and Johanna White. Welcome to you all and Happy New Year. I'd like to get right into it, and I'd love to hear about how Science for Georgia got started and about the work that you have been doing these last few years.
All right. Thanks, Lucky. And it's really great to be here. Thank you for inviting us. So I'm co-founder and president at Science for Georgia. I was around when Science for Georgia got its spark at the Atlanta March for Science in 2017. And we used those networks and resources that we gained from that event to incorporate and become a nonprofit in 2018. So the Science for Georgia mission is to improve science communication, advocate for responsible use in science policy, like Lucky just said. And we've been running several programs to that end, but we're putting science communications training at the center of it all. We want to create a pipeline in Georgia to turn scientists into science advocates, because if you want evidence-based policy, if you want a society that can debate politics using an agreed on set of facts, then you want to have scientists that can speak on the subjects that they're experts in. And you want them to not just be able to speak to their lab mates, you want them to speak to people that make policy or educators or family and friends. So to make that happen, we've started SciComm Academy. And the SciComm Academy training ends with a practicum. So it's not just a classroom. At the end of this, our learners create advocacy where they previously had, have been silenced, learn how to reach out to different people and make a material change. And it's taken us 4 years to get to this point, but we're really proud with how far we've come, the partners that we've made along the way, and we're looking forward to serving in 2021.
That's so awesome. And of course, I love that you talk about science communication. I mean, over the last year, right, it's become so important more than ever. It's been really crucial towards navigating the pandemic and, getting important public health advice out there, helping the communities, act responsibly and help protect each other's health, right? So how has Georgia been navigating the pandemic? I'm interested to sort of hear, and how has, science communicators and science communication played a role in that, and what could be done better, and how can we navigate through the rest of this pandemic?
Well, our organization, as with many, have become really familiar with the virtual format, and it's fortunate that most of our efforts have been translated or are able to be translated to virtual. That's not the case for a lot of organizations, unfortunately. As a state, we could be doing better. Let's see, Brandy, do you know what the hospital figures are right now?
Yeah, so I haven't checked today, but over the weekend, it was 25 hospital systems in Georgia were at capacity or almost completely full. I mean, we're converting conference centers into makeshift hospitals. This is why it's really important for scientists to be a part of the conversation, because if people aren't listening to us, this is the kind of thing that happens. So it's really important for us to make ourselves heard.
Yeah, and also, and I think a thing that we've been coming to realize is scientists, we're really good at getting out there and just inundating people with facts. We're like, oh, And no one thinks about facts. Like nor like us, all of us science minds are like, oh, tell me the facts, tell me all the statistics. I love it. But the rest of the world thinks about stories and context and how it really feels. So we've been doing a lot of focusing on let's tell individual stories about what's going on with the pandemic. Let's give people relative numbers, right? Like when you hear such a huge number of people dying, like what does that mean to you? Like how is that relevant? Like all these things to put things into perspective and to give people a lot of context around the science. And that's one of the things that we really try and focus on is, the science says 10% is X, and it's like, what does that mean to you? How does that affect your life? And then what are things that you can do proactively to lower this number, to make it better?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear, with the runoff coming up, that's a really important thing. And I've noticed that scientists have been very involved in the general election, and your team's been super involved in the general election and now coming up to the runoffs as well. I'd love to hear specifically for Georgia, what science, policy, and environmental issues are you passionate about? What's important for Georgia in particular?
Well, the Georgia Climate Project actually maintains a page dedicated to climate stories in Georgia. It's stories.climateproject.org if you're interested. But if you visit the page, you'll find out why flooding, coastal erosion, waterway pollution, major agricultural challenges, and strain on infrastructure are all issues that are already happening in Georgia. You can see that result of climate change. We've also partnered with Georgia Clinicians for Climate Action, and they're working to mitigate and adapt to health challenges brought on by natural disaster and shifting patterns of disease. Obviously, we recently witnessed how emergent health crisis disproportionately affects middle and low income households. And we don't want to see more Georgians enter the cycle of poverty and health disparity. We think if we make more Georgians aware of these issues that they're currently facing, may not know, they'll voice their concerns to their representatives and hopefully make material change through changes in policy and business culture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of, do you think Georgians like science is at the top of their minds when it comes to right now, with elections? I think something that really impressed me was that in around the general election, usually when I watch debates, I sort of count the number of times science is mentioned. And in previous years, it would be once or maybe none, right? And this year, these round of debates, I just stopped because everything was about the pandemic or it was about climate. So I thought there was an amazing shift, making science policy a really top issue, which is a step in the right direction given the crises that we find ourselves confronted with right now. Do you think that mindset, with your science communication work in the community, do you think that's shifting? Have you seen that shift a lot in the general election? And are you shifting it around the conversation to this runoff right now?
So I think the conversation is shifting, and I think a lot more people are aware of what's happening. I would say that it's still 50-50 in terms of like people who like wearing a mask became a partisan issue, and it didn't have to be, right? Like the world is literally on fire, and that is a partisan issue apparently. And like there were people like protesting against years of racial injustice in the streets, and that was a partisan issue. And I think we're still a little bit away from that. Like we're in Georgia, we're a deeply conservative state. I know we voted for Biden in the election, but that was a big shock to pretty much everyone, probably also the 4 people on this phone call. So like there's a long way to go. And so what we've learned a little is also how to contextualize it around Georgia, right? Like saying the words climate change is going to get us nowhere fast in this state. Like people are just going to tune you out, and they're going to move on with their life because they're going to think you're like a radical tree hugging hippie and want to take away all the jobs and I think make everyone socialist. I'm sorry. I like daily we get a new message about like what evils are coming for us. So instead of that, we have to think about like, how does this affect Georgians, and just talk about it in terms of like, what is the impact, right? Like there is coastal flooding, and that is hurting our fisheries, and that is hurting our way of life, and that is hurting our tourism, right? So let's just focus on solutions for coastal flooding. And if that then means that we don't have to say climate change, but we address climate change and we address the earth in a sustainable manner, then we've made a great stride. And a lot of our partner organizations kind of have taken the same tack in terms of like, let's focus on the here and now, and we're going to end around and get in things that are sustainable and scientifically accurate, but not necessarily say those words, because I think in this state, it still causes a lot of heartburn and drama, and you don't need it. So
yeah, I definitely think it's important to frame these issues in ways that people in each area will respond to, right? You know, people are often concerned when you say climate change that we're gonna, you know, stop all the jobs and blah, blah, blah. But, you know, nobody ever tells them, well, hey, climate change will affect, you know, major industries in Georgia, right? We're a majorly agriculture, you know, we have a lot of agriculture here, we have a lot of tourism, and all of these things are dependent on our environment staying the way it is. And so if we don't make, you know, great strides towards, you know, curbing climate change, then we are affecting jobs, we are affecting our economy, and that's something we really need to make sure people recognize.
I'd like to add to what Brandy said, but living in Savannah, I'm also about like 20 minutes away from the coast. So we're very prone to a lot of flooding and hurricanes. And so that will only, climate change will make it worse for my community. And also we have the Savannah ports here in downtown, which brings in about $25 billion to Georgia, and it's a major source of income and a major source of jobs as well. So yeah, climate change will may impact not just environmentally, but will also have economic consequences.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love so much of what you said there. And yeah, I think it's on the top of my wish list with messaging, really, is that who doesn't want good jobs? Who doesn't want good health, right? It's something that all climate advocates should keep repeating, rather than, I feel like we get in this cycle, and maybe the science community is probably guilty of this. I get it, because we do the research. We see, you know, the numbers spiraling out of control. It's easy to get bogged down with that. But like, I think in our public communication work, it's important to think, how does it affect local communities? And I think it's another important reason why there are groups like Science for Georgia, right? Because it's important to have local people in local communities who care about these issues, who are knowledgeable about these issues, to talk to your communities and work with them together. So thank you to you all for doing that important work. So we talked about this, I think, a little bit before we went live. I'm sort of interested, actually, because you was like, what's the mood like right now on the eve of the runoff in Georgia? You were saying you're getting so many ads, so much national attention. It must be a lot right now, right?
What's the mood like? That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, how are you feeling?
The running joke around here is, do you know there's an election tomorrow, right? Like, how many texts and postcards have we all received? Oh God. But Lewis?
Bailey.
Oh, so yeah, to know what the mood in Georgia is like, you sort of also need to know what the 2018 election was like here and what the election this past July was like. So our 2018 gubernatorial candidate was also the Secretary of State who oversaw elections for the state. That was a perceived conflict and led to, you know, understandable outrage. Losing the gubernatorial candidacy was Stacey Abrams. Since then, she's been working to increase voter participation to counter what was perceived to be voter suppression. The way the primaries were run this year didn't do anything to address the perception that the voting process was, you know, inclusive, because it was plagued with issues. Now, to be fair, it was the first election in a pandemic. We had new voting machines, new processes. But we had excessively long lines, and taking most of the blame was Brad, Raffensperger. But after that, I think we kind of learned from our mistakes, and this last time around went a lot more smoothly. Despite 2 recounts, there weren't all the issues that plagued voter sites. Biden had a win with a margin of about 12,000 votes. And, it was audited again and again. There were some minor errors that were found, but nothing significant that impacted the election. Now, despite all this evidence that there's nothing wrong with this election, there have been conspiracy theories floating around that have led to real threats of violence against election officials and their family. And this voter fraud, this election fraud propaganda has only ramped up since the election. And I'm really looking forward to a historical level of voter participation for this election. But I also just really don't want to see any violence. And that's what I'm afraid that we might see.
Yeah. In about 3 hours, I'm heading off to go set up a polling location. So, and in November, when we were all volunteering at the polls, like everyone who responded was like, oh, I've never worked at a poll before, but I realized that everyone should have the chance to vote. So I think there's been a lot of things around. We need everyone to vote, and we need everyone to have the opportunity to vote. And and I just want huge amounts of turnout, right? If the person wins who I didn't want to win, I will be okay, because it was not won on suppression or gerrymandering. It was just like the people of Georgia spoke, everyone had a chance to speak, and everybody's ready to go. And I feel that there's a lot of that. Now, granted, we kind of sit in our own silos and echo chambers, so there are a lot of conspiracy theories running around. And but I would say, having sat and worked in a polling location, it is very transparent. It is very obvious. Like, the reason that we can do such accurate recounts is because you vote on a computer, but then you get there's an actual paper ballot receipt that is actually read through the Scantron. So that way, when they do a recount, they have like hard ballots, right? There's none of this. It was all just stuck on a memory card, right? There are actual paper ballots for everybody's ballot, and there are signatures. And like, I voted by mail, and I got text messages. It's like tracked like a package now, right? Like, you send in your message and it's like, we received your ballot today. And then the next day you're like, and your ballot has been counted, right? Because we're a signature authority state, so your signature has to match. And so they'll let you know if your ballot is matched or not. They give you an opportunity to cure it. Like, absolutely, the June primaries were a total dumpster fire and pretty much an embarrassment, but I would say we really turned it around in Georgia, and I am very impressed with how like free and open and transparent and accessible these elections have been. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you so much for your work. Volunteering at the polls. I think it's one of the amazing things I've seen come out of this pandemic last year. I think because a lot of people who typically volunteer for the polls every year are elderly, and they're the most vulnerable people in terms of COVID and the pandemic. So I was really heartened to see over the last year so many people coming and helping with the democratic process. And on election night, it was really fantastic to see, right? Like, those counts in all the rooms, and just seeing how many people were working overtime, just to make this whole important democratic process work. It's really fantastic. And I am excited looking at the numbers of Georgia. I think the more people who vote, I think that's better for democracy, right? I think it's something like 3 million people voted early. That's 900,000 more than the general election. I think 100,000 more new voters in general. So that's really exciting at the moment. I'd love to sort of talk more about that, about the importance of voting. And I know, for instance, Stacey Abrams and Fair Fight and other groups have done a lot of work in that state to make voting more accessible. I'd love to hear you talk about why that's important. And I think particularly from the science STEM angle, something I always talk about and is always interesting, and I think it's more known among the community now, but people who are have science majors are the poorest voters compared with other majors, as in they don't show up to vote as often as other majors. That's really interesting to me, right? And so why is it important, as people who advocate and love and work in science, why is it important for science people to vote?
So, I mean, when you just get down to brass tacks, your elected officials also control the funding sources, right? Like the president, Congress, even some states, like Georgia has a funding line for research. Um, so if you don't care about anything else, you should care that they control your paycheck. I mean, that's bottom line, they control your paycheck. That's number one reason why everybody should go out and vote if you're a scientist. Um, the second reason is they also dictate, the priorities for research, right? And sometimes anti-priorities like climate change has been sort of a no-go in the last couple of years. And I mean, policymakers use the science that we create, the breakthroughs, the findings, they use this to dictate the policies they make. So it's important to vote for people who will actually listen to science and use scientific consensus in their legislative process. Why bother doing the work if you're not going to make sure it's implemented?
Yeah, so I am a recent graduate in chemistry with a master's degree in chemistry, sorry. But my personal opinion of why, so I'm thinking back to like undergrad and grad school, and I kind of noticed that scientists, like what was said earlier, is just talk about science. But I think we can do a better job in school by showing like what the implications of our science is, like by taking a science policy course or something like that, because that will definitely connect our science to people and how it's relevant to all of us.
Absolutely. And I'd love to sort of talk about the work that you've been doing as well over, particularly in 2020, around the runoff, around the general election, and I guess why it's important to, so voting is important, but it's also important to participate in advocacy, right? And you've been doing a lot of that work in Georgia. I'd love to hear about your experience over the last year and maybe the last few years, and why I think for us it's, so the good thing about the last 4 years is that according to like a lot of our research and research from groups like of the Union of Concerned Scientists, right, is that I think people who work in science or who care about science, they've been more active, ever, either politically or in terms of advocacy or in terms of, science communication, science outreach, science education, all of that good stuff. I think that's fantastic. And I think a fear as an organizer that I have is that with a new presidency and a new sort of setting, that all of this energy goes flat, right? And I think more than, we have a pandemic we still need to get through. We have a climate crisis we still need to get through. So many challenges where we need scientists to be at the forefront of these policy and public discussions, right? So how do we keep that momentum going, well into 2021 and beyond?
Right. Yeah. I mean, advocacy should be led by experts that know their topic and what should be done. And we should all support this going forward because we're still facing challenges in both policy and in culture. It's actually anti-science culture that I think is more problematic, and scientists and science advocates will continue to need our support going forward because that's still a huge problem.
And I know there was a lot of anger in the past 4 years, and that drove, I guess, us out of the lab and onto the streets and got a lot of people more involved. But I think part of the reason that I think we can help keep it going, right? Because we do need to give people things to do and keep their energy focused. The biggest thing that I always hear, when I go to a conference or you talk to people who are like, well, I want to advocate, but I don't know how, right? And I think that's the best thing that organizations like ours can be doing, is providing people like the pipeline of, here, learn about this issue, learn about something proactive that you can do about this issue. And oh, by the way, if you'd like to write your senator or congressperson, this is how to actually do it, right? Because sometimes just like the biggest fear is, opening up that email to Senator so-and-so, and you're like, well, what do I do now? Right? Like, I found their email address, and like, this is how to write an effective letter, because we are scientists. We do like to follow directions, right? So if someone gave us a roadmap on how to advocate, we're much more likely to do it. So I think, that's very important in terms of providing means and ways for people to do it. And then the second thing is focusing their energy, right? Because one of our biggest problems also as scientists is we come out and we're like, oh, we need to save the world. Here's a list of 150 things we have to do. And you turn everyone off because they're like, oh God, right? Like, what am I, 150 things, right? And it's like, so, we decided to go back to basics in 2021. We're going to focus on food, water, and shelter. And we're going to give everyone just like, here are 2 things that you can do that are evidence-based to combat food insecurity. Yeah, there's 150 things we can do to combat food insecurity, but here are 2 things that are practical for Georgia, that aren't scary, have a very low barrier to entry, and that also kind of make sense in a sustainable way, right? So we're giving people the whole package. So we want to make sure that as we deliver messaging, you can keep people's engagement and enticement up as long as they feel that it's part of their life and it's become a habit, as opposed to a thing that is onerous, like, oh, now I got to go write my senator, right? Like, no, you can help save the world by eating more plants and less meat, right? Like, there are very simple things that all of us can be doing, like stop drinking bottled water, right? Like, and, focus on these things. And then that way, when you do need to have a big call to action, like all of a sudden Congress is going to defund the EPA or something like catastrophic like that, it's like, then everybody's already in the habit of caring, and they're like, oh, of course I will open that email and I will write my senator and be like, don't do it, because it's already, I feel pretty connected politically already. So we want to just keep it up with very simple steps with a low barrier to entry to keep everyone just a low level of involvement, so when we need them, we can mobilize.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, how can people get involved with Science for Georgia, and how can they support the work that you're doing? And what things have you got coming up in the pipeline that you'd love to sort of have people participate in?
So unfortunately, not all PIs see value in supporting science communications training in their lab.
Right.
But the single most effective way to help Science for Georgia train scientists to become advocates is to help subsidize the cost of training for an early career professional by donating. We've got a donation page on our website, scienceforgeorgia.org. So just go there and donate. If you want to see the result of some of our trainings, you can sign up for our newsletter through our website. Follow us on social media. We often post the work of our graduates and interns there.
Yeah, and like I said, if you follow us on social media and stuff, we're always giving you like little tips that you can use to incorporate science in your life. There's a lot of theories and science around like habit forming and habit bundling and things like that. So we're trying to give people very small, manageable things. And then it is almost the legislative session in Georgia, which normally we would have been ramping up for that, but there's an election tomorrow, so we've been a little preoccupied. But we definitely will have things on our website and on our social media to advocate around in terms of things that are evidence-based. We are kind of at a crossroads here, and so we are going to have to build back, right? Like there are way more people that are going to bed hungry tonight than there were a year ago. There are way more people that are like about to lose their houses or have already lost their jobs, right? So there's going to be a lot of things that we can have an evidence-based and sustainable say in. And so we need to be very careful and watch a lot of that. So we will definitely have all of that on our social media and in our newsletters and give people ways that they can give back.
Yeah, and another way we can give back or be more engaged is by just reaching out. I did not know Science for Georgia. I just kind of like emailed Amy and said, I'm interested in this. And from there, we've kind of sorted out like what what issues I care about and see how I can fit in with Science for Georgia. So I'm always a big advocate of just reaching out to organizations and asking them what you can do to become involved.
Yep, there's real people on the end of all of our emails, I promise. So we'll answer, I promise.
That's awesome. That's people is what organizing is all about, right? So yeah, I'd like to sort of end. Do you have any final messages on the eve of the runoff about the election tomorrow? You know, voter information, anything, you know, sort of why people should vote, anything like that? Sort of maybe do a sweep of you all. I'd love to get your thoughts, final thoughts on this.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because while we were on the phone, I got 2 more texts telling me to remember to vote tomorrow. So if you didn't know there's an election tomorrow in Georgia, the only way to vote at this point in time is to vote in person. And so you can either swing by the Science for Georgia webpage, or more importantly, go to the My Voter page in Georgia, and it'll tell you exactly where to go vote and everything else. And then as my public service announcement, don't let them turn you away. They're lying, right? So definitely keep going for it. And join Science for Georgia, join us. And we look forward to working with everyone to make 2021 pretty spectacular.
Yep, go vote. That's my message. Go vote. If you're in line when the polls close, you can still vote. Stay in line, stay to vote.
Yeah, and voting is in everyone's interests. It doesn't matter what party you support. It's going to affect you. So like Brandy said, go vote.
All I have is stay safe, and thank you everybody for supporting us.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. And please go support Science for Georgia.